Hello and welcome to this summer's webinar series. Today we're going to talk about building motivation. Now, over a year ago, after our accreditation, we had a number of small classes on how to build up our students. We did this class together back then, and you had a lot of really positive things to say about it. So I went back and found it and am making it something that you can look at and hopefully use now. This one is based on the first chapter of the book, Using Differentiated Instruction to Reach All Students. That chapter is attached here. Last spring, we had talked about having a bunch of classes with instruction and then a bunch of homework. And, oh, I see. No, we want to edit that. Okay. So this past spring, we had a number of very brief classes and then this on Zoom, and then this huge list of homework for them. And it became drudgery very quickly. Our focus was to get the kids through what it was we had to get them through. And it basically worked, but we lost a lot of kids that way as far as, well, motivation, which is why I'm starting with this one. We want to try and build online distance learning in particular, but even your classroom learning as something that's more fun and more kid-oriented, and hopefully build self-motivation out of this. So we want kids who are going to have a sparkle in their eye, who like what they're learning, and that's the kind of thing that brings the families back. So we are going to look at building that in our classrooms. I know when we first talked about this over a year ago, you were really jazzed about making some changes in your classes. I also know that it's really easy to see a good idea and change one or two things, and then of course you get bogged down again. So here it is again, so that you can see it and understand it again, and hopefully build it into some of your lessons. So I'm going to take you back to where we were when we first discussed the ideas. If you could look over the first few pages of the chapter that we had read at the time, they're probably still in your black binder, but I've got them attached here if you want to go through them really quick. There are 3 bullet lists to describe how students tend to feel in class. And we started our discussion by trying to figure out where our students stand already. Of the 3 bulleted lists, where do you think your students fall? How do you think your students feel while they're in your class? Are they excited to be there? Or when you give them an assignment, do they groan? Look through the bulleted lists to get a good idea of all of the possible responses, and really take a minute to figure out who they are in your class, because these are the things that we want to tailor. Competence is a condition or quality of effectiveness, ability, sufficiency, or success. All people want to be competent at meaningful tasks, and it's up to us to help our students find the motivation. They want to do something that's meaningful, and if we give them drudgery, if we give them the same thing to do over and over again, it loses its meaning, and it's our job to find those places and to see what we can do to really engage our learners. So they're not just rolling their eyes at our work, they're actually interested in moving forward. So there's extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation comes from the outside. And those are stickers and grades and rewards and even diplomas. there's not a lot of long-term retention if you only use Extringent. If the kid is only doing this because mom told me to, or even because I want to get good grades, they're doing it because they have to, or because they're supposed to, or because they're that kind of kid, but they're not doing it because they really want to learn about it. And even though we can be really good at the extrinsic, we really need to see if we can pump up the inner stuff. The original webinar was all about building students who want to learn, who are excited to learn, and that comes from this place. Worksheets are not extrinsically motivating. Nobody cares about filling in the worksheet. Yay, look, I've got a worksheet, my finished product. They don't care. Differentiated instruction asks us to find work that is more intrinsic. Help us build the unit that the kid really wants to do. Pages 49 to 61 of this article gives us resources on how to figure out how to use motivation to our advantage, and to restructure our lessons and our approach to include this to help us help the students want to learn. Make them interesting, fun, relevant, and personally meaningful. And you look at this and it sounds hard, and you could probably pick 3 or 4 really good, successful units that you've already got. But let's talk about those other units, and let's try and build some units that are all of these things more often to our kids. The more we look at this, the more it helps make us better teachers, because there's more long-term retention for the students. When they have an intrinsic desire to learn, there's greater long-term retention, and so long-term, they are smarter. Research findings support that a person's environment can actually change their brain. Therefore, your job as a teacher is to create learning experiences and opportunities for brain-compatible learning to reach all learners. It's our job to create that environment, even if it's long distance, and it just might be this spring. There are 3 domains to the brain, and we teach these when we teach Mind Up. If you've taught your kids Mind Up, they already understand how their learning is affected by these 3 parts of the brain. But I need you to also understand them as teachers so that you can utilize them all to help you get to your learners better. We have the cerebral cortex, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. The hindbrain is the brainstem and the cerebellum, and this controls and organizes the autonomic systems. If you want students to pay attention to classwork, then we can't have distractions in these symptoms like being hungry or being too cold or too hot. Now, if they're in our classroom, then we can regulate how often they have a snack or the temperature of the classroom. If we're teaching long distance, then part of our teaching to them is also what we expect of them. Sit up at a desk or a table and have all of your work in front of you, and you're dressed reasonably appropriately. You're not lounging in bed and, oh, I guess I'll get up to get my pencil kind of thing. That we have to set the stage for all of our distance learners and set up the environment so that they're ready to pay attention to classwork. If you want students to pay attention to classwork, then they have to have no distractions in their major systems. They can't be hungry. They can't be too hot or too cold. They can't be sweltering. Now, this is great if you're in a classroom environment and you can control how often they have snacks and the temperature of the classroom. But if you're distance learning, you also have to have them set themselves up for an environment there, which means it can't be a place of distraction. They need to be sitting up at a desk or a table. They need to have all of their supplies there. They're not lounging around in bed, rolling their eyes, saying, "Oh, I guess I'll do the." So there has to be some kind of a setup at the beginning of our distance learning, whether that's September or October or whenever, so that we realize that we're creating the right space for our brain to learn. The cerebellum controls movement, balance, and coordination. It's good with procedural memories, and it can filter out repetitive things so that you can pay attention to the other stimuli. Now, this is good for us because it's really good at helping kids stay with the program. If we've set it up so that this is how you do it every single day, and we reinforce that they're doing it every day, they will do it every day. However, if it gets too boring, they'll filter it out, which is why the kids in the back are always distracting to each other and trying to catch each other's eye, because they're filtering out the repetitive sound of your voice and paying attention to other stimuli. So this works for us and against us. If assignments get too repetitive, they fall into this category. If the kid's just going to roll their eyes and say, "Oh my gosh, we have to write spelling sentences again," or "We have to do multiplication mad minutes again," then they do this. We need to be able to create some variety in our assignments, help make them engaging and creative to help improve student learning. If you're trying to get them to work with vocabulary definitions, there could be 3 or 4 different ways that you offer so that the kids have a choice. This is where choice comes in. We had talked once before about the multiple intelligences, and some kids like art, and some kids like acting things out, and some kids like writing and reading, and we need to be able to offer them the choice so that they have some say in their education, so that they can be more engaged in what they're doing. The midbrain contains the amygdala and the hippocampus. The hippocampus processes long-term memory and spatial awareness. We need this to work so that students can learn. Girls have a slightly bigger hippocampus, giving them a slight advantage in school-based learning, especially in language arts. The amygdala gives emotional coloring to experiences and regulates attention. You want to repeat things that gave you good emotional responses before. So if you give them an assignment and you treat it like, yeah, we got to get through this, then every time you give it, they're going to feel that same emotion of, "Oh my gosh, I've got to get through this." If you attach with it some kind of a sense of, we're going to beat our last score, some kind of competitiveness or friendly rivalry, or hey, it's time for us to do this, some kind of something, some emotion that goes with the repetitive stuff that we do have to do, then they will remember that emotion every time they start to do that. So realize that the emotion that you put into something really does carry through, and you want your kids' emotional connections with you and your assignments to be positive. If a student gets upset, emotional responses can block access to the hippocampus and any real learning. And it takes up to 20 minutes to get someone calmed down enough to get back to learning. So if you've got someone who's starting to get upset, you need to completely stop everything and help them calm down. Now, if you're in the middle of a physical classroom, you can say, okay, students, get to work while I take Janie here off to the side while we deal with her temper tantrum. But if you're at home, that's not going to work as well, and it's going to have to take you a little bit more. But please realize that the more emotional kids get, the worse off it gets for learning.